Today I'm talking with Leslie, a self-preservation 4 and an ENTJ. I'm very excited. You're rounding out my 4 trio. I'm going to speak to all the 4s about creativity. Thanks for joining me
Fantastic.
today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So, what does creativity mean to you?
Yeah. You provided the questions ahead of time, so I've been like processing this and really thinking about like what is it to me? I think if you'd asked me that, when I was younger, I would have definitely said, "Oh, it's like some sort of artistic output, right? Like some sort of artistic work, painting, drawing, music." Um, and because I'm none of those, I'm not a musician, I'm not an artist. Like there was a long time where I didn't actually feel like I was very creative, even in the face of a lot of evidence from other people and, being able to have creative work. So I think now at this stage of my life, what I've come to is that life is actually a creative act. And I think that to me, creativity is being a vessel really to what can flow through me. And that requires an allowance, like allowing and being present to what the world and what life is giving me. And then what am I going to make of that? No matter what it is that it's giving me. And as a
Mm,
4, so often I feel like something's missing. I don't have the right conditions. I don't have this, or this is missing. And if just this or if that. And so for me, like radical creativity is being present with what is and working with that. So I'm actually reading The Creative Act. Is it called The Creative Act? I think by Rick Rubin. And it's really like totally in line with everything, every page. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. And that's what I'm thinking now is like my life is a creative act and I want to be open and aware and sensitive to what's flowing through me
mm,
from another source, essentially. Yeah.
mm. I think that's something that we can all learn from 4s is that life is a creative act and to not
Mm,
overlook uh, what that can mean and what that can be in its totality.
absolutely.
Because as you say, most of us carry that bias around that unless it's a musician or a painter or something that's defined by society as creative, that, then
Yeah.
nothing else is.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I love that term radical creativity. I'm
Mm.
totally holding on to that one. That's awesome.
I will give it to you. I will bestow it upon you.
Thank you very much. Much
You're
appreciated.
welcome.
So, what I know you make a podcast. I don't know what other creative practices you have at the moment, but when you are making and creating, like what does that feel like to you?
Yeah. Well, just to clarify too, I have actually had some like actual, like I was a photographer for a while. I was a graphic designer. I was a video, but all those kind of like are things that I'm like, oh, that doesn't matter, right? Like that's not enough. Um, but going back to your question, I think in referencing what I just said, when I get out of the way, essentially, and I allow that flow to flow through me, it feels like effortless. It feels like,
Mm,
if you're imagine that you are underwater and you're holding your breath and you're like holding it and like, just a little bit longer, I'll hold it just a little bit longer. And you're right under the surface, right? And I think a lot of ways, I won't speak for everyone, but for myself, I think life can be like that. A lot of times you're like, just 1 minute longer, 1 second longer. When in reality, all I have to do is break through the surface and take that deep gulp of life giving breath. And what I'm coming to understand and believe is that that's what creativity is. It's like there all along.
hmm
All you have to do is just reach for it or allow yourself to burst through that surface and
mm,
do what you naturally would do, which is breathe. So I think on the flip side, when I haven't been in this space of what I've been describing, creativity it has felt like at times a lot of disappointment and a lot of like hesitating to even get started because what I create, what I produce, whether it's writing or a photograph or a podcast, like it's never going to be as good as the vision in my head or the image that I have in my head. So in the past, I think it's been a lot of disappointment and sadness and pain and
mm,
frustration. Um, but like I said, now I'm trying to allow it to just flow and to open myself in that way, to be open.
Mm. I like that metaphor. And also that the understanding that once you can let the thoughts and feelings of lack and what's missing, to
Mm.
let those go, that the creativity sort of just emerges.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. I believe that 100%. And, I'm sure you may have talked about this previously, but we all are creative in some way. And if you have a belief of something bigger than you, whether it's God or the universe or something, the collective unconscious, there is a source of something bigger than you. And in my perspective, all creativity can flow from that, can stem from that. And we just have to allow ourselves.
Mm,
I think back also a long time ago, I used to think that all of my creative ideas were inherently mine, right? Like they came from me and there was a lot of attachment to them. And so there also could be a lot of disappointment if it wasn't received in the way that I thought it should be, or if it was criticized, or, you know, there was something missing in it. Um, so yeah, I totally lost my train of thought going down that path, but I think that being open, is key for me, being open to allowing that creativity to flow through me, being sensitive to what's being shown to me. Yeah.
mm. You were saying that in the past, you sort of saw all of your ideas and creativity as your own. And
Oh,
so I'm curious, as
got it.
now, do you create from the perspective that it's not yours, or it sort of originates within you and then it becomes part of the collective? Like, how has that shifted for you?
Yeah. Okay, thanks for bringing me back. Um, I think of course, if I'm a vessel, so to speak, like there are things about me that are unique. Um, but that's true for everyone. Like every person has a unique way of interpreting their downloads, so to speak, or what flows through them. And so, of course, I am part of that. Like I am the tool, so to speak, or I am the hands and the whatever that can make that a reality. So I believe it's not one or the other. It's not outside of me or only me. I think it's both. I know I'm speaking in probably pretty abstract terms here, but hopefully people can understand what I'm talking about when, if they have a belief in something bigger. Um, and yeah, I think for that idea of holy origin, of that, the fact that the way I see it anyway is that we are all unique expressions of the same source. So even though we're not all the same person, and um, I'm not totally separate and different from everyone else, like my ego wants to tell me,
Mm,
or I'm totally unique and no one else can compare in the ways that I'm different or whatever. Those are things that I've thought in the past and believed. Every person has something like that, every person. And that's what my work is, to appreciate that, not only about myself, but about everyone. Um, yeah. So hopefully
mm.
that's answering your question.
It does. And I'm curious because you mentioned being a photographer and a graphic designer, and I think all of those are important. And because fours and sevens are often, defined or described as the creative types. And and I love how we've just described creativity as when we can let that personality, that part of the personality piece go. So I'm curious, has there been a difference for you between how you were creative before you understood your Enneagram type and now that you understand your self-pres 4? How has that changed things for you?
Yeah. Well, okay, saying that fours and sevens are the most creative type or whatever, I think my instinct is to be like, oh, well, I'm not creative enough, right? Like, I must be different than all the other fours and have missed that particular piece of
Well, thank
my
you for
my
sharing that.
makeup.
I appreciate that instinctive reaction. Um,
Yeah. I know it's not true. And again, like part of my work as a four is allowing in the good, which goes back to all the things I've been saying. So
mm,
allowing in the good, allowing joy. And I think um, Okay, so before, back to your question, I think I would have thought like, all right, I created this photographic project or this video or this thing, right? This thing in the world that I put out and it's part of me. Um, it's an artistic output, as I said at the beginning. And oh, okay, I am creative, therefore I did this, therefore I'm creative.
Mm-hmm.
Now I don't see that as necessary. I don't see that piece of it. Like I don't actually have to create something in order to be creative. Um, I don't have to have an output, an artistic output. Um, so I think that's definitely changed. You know, as I was saying a minute ago, when you first asked me that question, the comparison around, you know, what all the other fours are, they're writing poems and they're writing songs and they're doing this and that. And I've spoken to a lot of fours who feel very similar to me of like, oh, well, I don't do that. So where does that leave me? And that's
Mm.
inherently fours compare, you know, we're either above or we're below. We're never on the same
Mm.
um, plane, so to speak, as what other people are, which is really unfortunate when we're in personality, and it can keep us from, I think, some of our greatest creative acts in life when we're in that space. Yeah.
Mm. I think I know we might say with fives, I think therefore I am, and with fours we've said I feel therefore I am, but it just came to me, I create therefore I am.
Ah,
And it made me, I was curious, in hearing that, how you said you sort of had to put something out into the world in order to, well, I created something, so therefore I am creative. And I sometimes wonder that for myself because I make things and think, well, just because you made it doesn't mean you're creative. It's a slightly different thought process, but it's still just as destructive. But I wonder, I don't entirely know where I'm going with this thought, but I just found it interesting how we react to that concept, you know,
yeah,
and the rigidity of that false belief and letting it go.
yeah, yeah. And another thing I'm reminded of is, and I don't know if all fours are this way about like having that output. But and I'm sure that's a combination of my particular types that I think you might have mentioned earlier. But part of being creative for me is letting go of an expectation of the outcome of like getting to the end result, so to speak, or getting to the piece that I can then show, or as a representative of me, and moving from that to
Mm,
the process. And as I said at the beginning, like I'm seeing life as a creative act. So that happens. What happens in the process is really where the creativity happens. Um, and yeah, just because you created something doesn't mean you are creative. Like what happened in that whole process? What were you open to? What did you skip? What did you ignore? What did you not allow in? What did you try to control? Right.
mm,
So that it had your own unique stamp on it. Speaking from my own perspective, my own personality, what did you just push aside that would have actually been a whole lot better, or maybe a lot more beautiful, or a lot more impactful, or a lot more resonant, or maybe a lot more truthful, even,
mm,
um, because you had, speaking for me, your own vision of the way it had to be and the way that you personally wanted to express yourself through that thing. So yeah, I think quite a lot has changed for me.
mm. And I think I'm finding interesting the controlling of the process is almost like that constriction. And when you're constricting in some way, then there isn't the space for flow or for the things to flow in that might need to flow in for that particular piece of work or whatever you're creating.
Absolutely. Fours are connected to one, and I visit my one quite a bit. And I think self-res fours especially can come off a little one-ish. And anytime perfectionism comes into play, um, that's a creativity killer right there, because there's a sense, at least for me, that it has to be in this particular way. And even I may not be able to define what that is, but whatever I create is not good enough, right? It's not perfect enough.
Mm,
It's not like just these other things. I could have done these other things to make it better. Um, and that's, I think, for a four, that's a perpetual dissatisfaction with what is, and that goes right along with what I create too.
Mm. I noticed that a lot for me when I was trying to create like a website for my business. And, that's something that took me several years because I didn't have the skills to create what I wanted. And
Mm,
I don't have the skills of a graphic designer in order to do something. And so I almost just did nothing
mm,
because I was like, well, if it can't look the way I want it to look and I don't have the skills and I'm not about to be able to learn those skills, then nothing's happening. And it was that
mm,
the constriction of either, what do I need to let go of? But for a while there, I couldn't let go of anything. And it took a long
yeah,
time to learn that I don't have to be completely in charge of every part of that creative process, and some letting go of some kind has to happen.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, so I'm curious, since I feel like we're talking about creative blocks
Mhm.
in an abstract way, in a more direct way, how have you really like wrangled or dealt with, either small or large creative blocks as they've arisen?
Yeah. I think I mentioned earlier already about like frustration. There can be a lot of frustration. There can be a lot of like wanting it to happen, like wanting those creative insights or downloads or thoughts to come, to be inspired, like to conjure up inspiration, you know. Um, and so I think in the past, a lot of what I did was sit and fret and worry and like, oh, nothing's coming. Um, and what I have sort of learned, and I guess practice of like just taking a breather, walking away from it, which can literally mean going outside. It can mean just changing locations, which I mean, these aren't groundbreaking ideas. I'm sure other people have talked about them, but um, what I have had to learn to trust that the right thing will bubble up at the right time, and can't really force that process. But what I do try to do to prepare myself to like, you know, stoke the fire, so to speak, to be ready when I do have like a block of time where I need to sit down and write something is I try to keep track of ideas as they come up, in a document or a notebook or something where I have like a well of resource or material to pull from, instead of just starting from a blank slate, whether it's writing or any other creative process. So I found that that is something that helps, the stepping away and then the keeping track of the ideas can really
Mm,
help when you experience the block. Also, not looking at it as a block, of knowing that it's going to, um, like I said, I trust that it's going to come in the right time.
mm. I'm curious about the list of creative ideas because that's something I've kept and I've heard other people give that
Mhm.
suggestion as well. But I'm curious, when you sit down, how do you choose the one on the list? Because what
Uh,
I find challenging is I need the excitement. I need the seven excitement to tell me,
mm,
what can I write about, which often isn't helpful because either it isn't there or, I mean, sometimes the excitement is a misnomer for sevens and it's not something that's actually guiding me in the right direction. So I'm curious,
mhm.
how do you pick the thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think my answer is probably different based on whatever I'm doing. I think there's a lot of, um, yeah. So I want to say again, going with the theme of what I've been sharing, there's a sensitivity I think that can be developed, to paying attention to what if we're talking about the Enneagram, what my head, heart, and body when they're sort of in alignment, or what all three of those things are guiding me towards. So there can be an element of that. There can be an element of just I feel like this is the right one, and
Hmm.
I can't really explain that beyond it's the one that looks larger than all the rest, even if they're all written in the same font, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's so and then sometimes, I'll pick one and it's not the right one. And then I'll have to go back or maybe I'll ignore that small voice of like you should pick this one. And I again going back to the control, like, no, this is the one I really want to explore right now or the one I want to express. Um, and then noticing things that are coming up and I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I should go back and revisit that other idea. So it's
Mm.
a very imperfect process.
Mm.
um, but again, creativity is in the way I'm defining it, an openness, it's an awareness, it's a sensitivity, it's an allowance. So growing and developing those, I think, can steer us in the right
Mm,
direction. Mm.
mm. I think that's an important thing to note, that there is that sensitivity, but also it's a flow, it's a process, it's a forwards and backwards. Yes,
Yeah,
maybe I chose this one, maybe my personality chose that one, and now that I'm paying attention, I can see that this isn't what's right for right now,
yeah,
and
yeah,
just playing with it.
yeah, absolutely. And knowing too that this is something I've had to, continue to work on. Is like if I do go down that path of like exploring that idea and choose, that I'm going to be committed to that thing, I can always go back, right? It's okay. Like nothing most of the time has really been lost. I mean, there are times when you lose time or whatever, but um, and that brings up another point of like real, true creativity can't have those time constraints. Like obviously, we have to produce things at certain times, but the more openness we can allow ourselves, and at least for me, I need blocks of time where it's like free flowing, and I
Mm,
don't have an appointment that I have to rush to, or something that has to be done, because that shuts it down.
mm. So I'm hearing that the sensitivity and the noticing and the openness and having lots of, the free time to explore all support you to be creative. Is there anything else that really stands out as what supports you to be creative?
Yeah. I think I might have already mentioned this, but letting go of the expectation of the
Hmm.
outcome,
Yeah.
um, being present with what is. Um, I think inspiration is something that I used to think, oh, I have to be inspired. And so I have to
Hmm.
go get the book, and I have to go to the art museum, and I have to like watch this beautiful documentary or whatever. Again, something's missing. I always have to have something else.
Mm,
Um, that's what I'm connecting it to anyway, is my personality patterns. But I think if I'm living life as a creative act, and I'm living life as like I can be inspired by anything life is giving me, um, what my choice is, what am I going to do with that? What am I going to do with the raw materials that are here right now in this minute, that I'm being presented with?
mm,
So, um, of course, books and music and movies and those types of things, I can take them in and they can inspire me on an ongoing basis, but I don't have to have that input, I don't believe, to be creative and to express my creativity.
mm. Yeah, I found similar but different. Obviously, just I have to have the excitement. Without the excitement, how can I, what's the exciting thing? And often in referring to the books and wanting to share others' ideas,
Mm,
in my sort of seven way, is that sometimes I'll use that as a crutch to avoid being truly creative. Because if I could be and can be present with what is, then I can get in touch with whatever it is that I, need to say. What's the truer, more authentic, more connected thing that needs to emerge,
yeah,
which is not connected to the excitement at all.
yeah. And I think too, you're bringing up another point of like, when when I am, I guess, in personality, and I'm being driven by that, and I'm like sort of clouded by those patterns, um, pulling from books and like different and movies, like there can bring comparison and envy too in those situations, which, um, that's another thing of like learning to take in those things, those materials, those sources of inspiration without doing that dance of like, oh, but they're this and they're that, and it's so much better, and or that's terrible, and I'm so much better. Like it could be either one.
Mm,
Um, and trying to really, what I've tried to do recently when I've been in like a museum situation is appreciate what is and what's present and what that particular artist was able to create. We're talking about actual artistic works,
mm,
um, and having gratitude. I think for me specifically, and also for fours, gratitude is such a huge thing because it can ground us, a little bit more, and help cultivate contentment.
mm.
Um, and appreciation for what others are able to do and what the creativity of others. And we need everyone's creativity.
Mm,
That's again back to the like unique expressions. I think we all need to play our own instrument in song, metaphorically speaking, um, to manifest or see the potential of the world and the beauty that it can be.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, I'm just allowing that to sink in because
Mhm.
we do need everyone to be expressing their creativity
Yes.
um, in as their unique way. I think that's
Yeah.
really key. And I don't think we live in a world where there is the space, time, or support for that to happen as much as we potentially need it to.
Yeah. I think that's true. And I think, it's why I love what you're doing with these conversations, hopefully empowering, inspiring people to know that they don't have to have the world telling them or providing the support and the resources and the right conditions for them. That maybe it's an inner excavation, it's a inner journey of figuring out where is your creative spark, where is your piece of creativity, how are you being inspired, what's flowing through you,
Mm,
and what are the creative ways in which you can respond to what the world is giving you now, no matter which situation you find yourself in, because we
mm,
all, we're not starting on the same level. There's, some of us have different extenuating circumstances and traumas and things like that that can impact, um, I guess there's some layers covering up some of that, I guess I'll say. Yeah.
mm. Yeah. So I'm curious about what is your proudest creation?
Yeah. Yeah. When I read that question, again, was preparing and thinking about this conversation, I initially was like, oh, well, I have this project and this project and this project. Um, and it's true. I think, well, first of all, being proud of something has been really difficult for me, like um, because to me, feeling proud feels like satisfaction and it feels like it's finished. And I have extremely rarely ever felt that with anything that I've created. And even now, I go back and I think, oh, well, that podcast episode I just did, well, I could fix this and that and this and that. Um, so as I started thinking through that, I was like, actually, I think what I'm most proud of, if I use that word, is the way that I'm attempting to live my life right now. And developing that sensitivity, right, to the ways in which I receive that information and the ways in which I can express something universal, um, and trying to live a life of intentionality and consciousness, which is
Mm,
not everyone's goal.
hmm.
um, not to put myself in any a different category, but I'm just like, for those listeners who are like recognizing that, um, that is a thing of beauty and it's something to, yeah, I struggle with that word proud because again, in my mind, it's hard to not put myself like above when I think of being proud
Mm,
of something. So I would say, maybe I'll say I'm most content with the creative act of the way I'm living my life and what I'm learning and how I'm working to allow that to flow through me to impact like my clients and the people around me. Um, yeah, so I think I'll leave it there.
no, I really appreciate that. And it's actually one of the questions I've come to enjoy asking the most because I'm getting the most diverse and interesting answers to that question.
Mm,
And I'm
yeah.
finding it fascinating because proud is a strong word and we have strong reactions to it for very different reasons.
Yeah.
And so I love that you've had this strong reaction and you've been able to share that with us as to, how how you respond to that particular word and that you're most content with how, you're intentionally living your life.
Yeah, I think too, I'm just reminded of like something that's really present for me right now is my relationship with myself and my experience of joy. These are like very new things for me of like
Mm,
going from with my relationship with myself from literal self-hatred to like,
mm,
oh, I actually like myself, you know?
mm,
Like to me, that is like a huge step. And I think in some ways it's creative because
mm,
for me, it has been very easy to find all the flaws and find all the things I don't like about myself and find all the ways I want to reject myself, right? And even rejecting joy and rejecting happiness and rejecting contentment and rejecting the good, like that's super easy for me to do. It
mm,
doesn't require a lot of creativity or a lot of like thinking in new ways or acting and responding in new ways. But now that I allow joy through me, it's actually what I'm experiencing is a more fullness of being alive, a more fullness
mm,
of my emotional expression, um, a greater fullness, I should say, rather, of the creativity that I can manifest in the world.
mm. No, it's beautiful. Thank you. And
Welcome.
as someone who's also walked the path from self-hatred to something else, I think for me, getting into this, allowing this, this recent piece of somatic, therapy work to allow this piece of creativity to sort of slot in, I feel this sense of wholeness in a way and completeness in a way I haven't felt before. Someone was asking me yesterday, what did you gain from that? I don't think I gained anything. I think I just came home to myself. I think it's always been there, but I've been so separated from it as a part of myself that I wasn't able to be with. And so for me, it's just about this feeling of completeness, which I think is also contentment, for a 7, but it's just this grounded wholeness that I've never really known that I was missing, but always felt like something was not there.
Yeah. Yeah, this concept of coming home has been on my mind actually. I went to to a retreat a few weeks ago, and there was an aspect of that as part of our work. And I think that is what if people who are doing Enneagram work, people who are doing self-development work, people who are trying to um, fulfill their greatest potential, if you will, I think that it's all about coming home, right? And not just being totally involved in ourselves and um, who we are and my identity, which is, as a 4, it's like always about my identity, right? Digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And what's the next layer I can figure out? Um, but it's really like, what is all that about? And what's underneath that? Like, who am I underneath the really strong identity that I might hold about myself? um, or what I think is actually authentic. And maybe it's not actually authentic at all, you know?
Mhm.
So, and all of that, like, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of digging. And it takes a lot of, um, a lot of courage and willingness, to look at those things and to be willing to let your world be rocked of like, oh, so maybe I wasn't actually being my truest, most authentic self. Um, And, recently working with my coach, she said that's huge for a 4 to like see that
Mm,
what they think is authentic is actually not all that authentic. Even though we strive to be our truest
mm.
self. So anyway, kind of got off the topic a little bit, but that coming home piece is really important to me. And I love that you brought it up because it feels synchronous to what I'm working
Mm.
on.
Yeah, very much a part of the process that I think it's hard to explain until it's settled into it, that space
Yeah.
in a way. I mean,
Yeah.
I always talked about it and we talked about it, but I don't think I truly felt it or knew what it meant until for me, this piece of the puzzle, this creativity piece, was unlocked or released.
Yeah. Yeah. I think too, going back to what I was saying earlier, the sensitivity to the present and what is let's use a book for example. You can read a book and get something out of it and then read it a year or 2 or 10 years later and it's totally different, right? Like it's a totally
Mm,
different takeaway or a totally different understanding. And I see, that's the beauty I'm trying to find in life of like recognizing that maybe what I'm seeing right now, maybe what I'm experiencing, maybe what I think and I believe and I feel is not the only thing. Maybe there's something else, and maybe it will be different in a year or two or three.
mm,
Maybe there'll be a different source of inspiration. Maybe it will
yeah.
flow through and have a different output than what it does now. So, yeah, I see all of that as creativity.
Yeah. Yeah. So many things. Anything you wanted to add or you feel like we've missed or need to say before we wrap up?
Yeah. Um, I'm smiling because I'm working on like I really feel complete. I do feel complete. I'm working on like recognizing there's really nothing missing. I'm going to trust that what I've said um, has flowed through. What needed to be said was said. And again, that feels creative to me because it's it's something I'm not really trying to control. So
Mm,
I appreciate your questions and appreciate the conversation.
perfect. Thank you so much for all your wisdom and insight and your journey.